Today we will look at a tragic story that will shock you, so watch this video until the end. A night of celebration and carefree fun took a dark and unexpected turn. In a lively nightclub, amidst the pulsating beats and flashing lights, a young woman found herself separated from her friends. The joyful atmosphere quickly deteriorated as she searched in vain for familiar faces. Her attempts to contact her friends were futile. Unanswered calls and unread messages only increased her despair. Just when hope seemed lost, a seemingly kind stranger offered to help her get home. Trusting his offer, she got into a taxi, unaware that this decision would lead her to a nightmare. Hours later, a series of chilling clues began to unravel the terrifying story. India Chipchase was born in Northampton, England on Christmas Eve 1995 to Jeremy and Suzanne, her devoted parents. Despite the fact that having a Christmas tree in the month of your birth does not guarantee that you will always have a festive mood, India was extremely energetic and treated Christmas with incredible passion and love. She was praised for her bravery, vivacity, and energy. Those who knew India well claimed that she had the ability to light up a room whenever she entered. Her mother claimed that she thrived on the hustle and that wherever she went, she had the ability to radiate tremendous energy, making every experience interesting. India cared about people, and this is why, when she grew old enough, she decided to pursue a degree in health and social care. After finishing her degree, she wanted to help solidify her commitment to helping people by applying to become a paramedic. While many people in her life were surprised by this decision, India's family knew that she would excel in a position such as this, with her ability to make every negative moment a positive, as well as being able to work well under pressure. India showed promise in her chosen career path. She was now hopeful for her future at just 20 years old. Northampton is located in the East Midlands, England. It is a historic trading town on the banks of the Nene River with a population of over 300,000 people. Northampton is a pretty busy city. It kind of matches the energy that India needed. It is situated within an hour of both London and Birmingham. If you've heard of Northampton before, it's probably due to its history of shoe production. India had endless opportunities for the future, opportunities that, unfortunately, it would never take advantage of. On January 29, 2016, India and a group of friends went to a cocktail bar and nightclub to spend their evening laughing, dancing, and enjoying some drinks. After drinking 6 cocktails and several other drinks, India realized that she had distanced herself from her friends. In a state of intoxication, she ventured outside to search for them, but she saw no sign. When she tried to go back inside to continue her search, she was denied entry by security. Now stranded on the streets, the once joyful night proved to be simply frustrating for India. She was left to try and figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, India's friends, who were still inside the bar, also realized that India had become separated from the group, and they began looking for her too. When she was not in sight at the club, they decided that India had gone home without them and just hoped to see her the next day. It was now 1 a.m. India was outside the bar in the cold, wondering what to do. This was when she turned to the doorman. She asked him to help her call a cab, telling him that she just wanted to go home. The doorman, in response, walked out onto the curb and flagged down a taxi for her. When India got into the cab, due to her level of intoxication, the cab driver asked her to pay him the fare up front. This only made India more frustrated, and her frustration now grew even worse. She decided to exit the cab and tried to think of another option to get home. She was now stranded on the side of the road, in no real state to try and get home on her own. She took out her phone and tried to call her boyfriend several times, but she was left with no answer. Returning once again to the doorman, she told him again that she wanted to go home, but he was now too busy to help her at all. However, before he went inside the club, he did tell one of his co-workers to keep an eye on her. India, unsure of what to do next, sat on the curb, crying as she searched through her phone, desperately trying to find a way to get home. At this moment, a bystander noticed India in distress. He asked her if she needed help getting a ride home. The man promised that he would get India home safely, and she hesitantly agreed. She allowed him to help her call a new taxi. The man took her by the arm, helping her off the pavement. He aided her in putting her phone away, and he called a new taxi. After helping her inside the car, the man climbed in behind her and shut the door. Around 3 a.m., India's boyfriend received a message about her numerous missed calls a few hours earlier. India's worried boyfriend tried to call her back several times, but no one answered his calls and messages. Thinking she was still probably out partying, he made the decision to go back to sleep, anticipating that he would speak to her later that morning. The next day, Over 12 hours later, at 4 p.m. on January 30th, India's parents received a call from her co-workers at the Collingtree pub and restaurant where India worked as a bid. India's parents immediately became fearful. It was at this time they learned that India had never arrived at work for her shift that day. Wasting no time with this news, they immediately called the police to report their daughter as missing. The police, thankfully, immediately became involved in her disappearance, especially since it had been over 12 hours since anyone had heard from her. The police were working to trace India's path as far as possible, as the last place India was seen was a bar with her friends. Police worked to recover CCTV footage from outside the bar. A few hours later, officers received the footage and watched India's every move. They watched as India became increasingly more intoxicated with her friends, slumped over the bar, and dropping her purse on the floor. They watched as India stumbled outside, appearing lost and confused as she tried to find her friends, and then the realization that she just needed to go home. They watched her interactions with the doorman, how she had gotten into a cab and angrily gotten back out, and then sat on the curb in tears. The real point of interest, though, was the mysterious man, the man who helped her off of the sidewalk and into another cab. One of the officers, to their surprise, recognized the man who had gotten into the cab with India. It was a man named Edward Tenniswood. While officers tried to discern the next steps after this breakthrough, back at the station, investigators worked to trace pings from India's phone. They looked at her mobile data after she left the bar, tracking her location to 2 separate McDonald's restaurants, a BP petrol station, and a residential address. While CCTV footage continued to be analyzed, they watched as various cameras captured India's cab journey. They could match up the CCTV footage to each of the pings from her phone. This was the best-case scenario. Within hours, authorities had access to CCTV footage that tracked India everywhere, matching locations with her phone signal, providing the address of her last destination, and identifying the identity of her mysterious companion. All that was left to do was to see if the name and address belonged to the same mysterious man. After reviewing the records, police soon discovered that the address at which India's phone rang was in fact that of Edward Tenniswood. The police rushed to the address they received. They also received a search warrant, which allowed them to gain access to the specified address. Arriving at the address, the police first knocked on the door and announced their presence, but when they got no answer, they kicked down the front door and stormed inside. The police conducted an armed search, combing every square inch on the ground floor of the dirty room. Finding nothing, the police cordoned off the first floor and then went up to the second. This is where they discovered the horrifying sight of India's lifeless body. She was covered by a plastic sheet, her hair arranged into a halo shape above her head. Devastated by the sight, officers called the necessary authorities. The case was now transferred to a homicide investigation. India Chipchase went clubbing on Friday night, but never returned home. A day and a half later, the 20-year-old's body was found by police. She was dating the rugby player Ivan Rhian from New Zealand, who is currently with a team in Bordeaux. Ivan Rhianum wrote in his online dedication, "I honestly can't believe to think even now that you have left us in that way," he wrote. "I honestly hope that you rest in peace, hun, and that I will be playing for you for as long as I know." As officers quickly turned their attention to locating Tenniswood, India's body was removed from the home and sent to be examined by a professional. Luckily for police, Tenniswood took no precautions whatsoever to hide his whereabouts. He was captured on CCTV footage checking into a nearby hotel just hours earlier. Tenniswood was sitting in the hotel lobby, watching TV, when officers walked through the front doors. After arresting him on suspicion of homicide and searching his person, Tenniswood was found carrying a bag which contained a sharp kitchen utensil and latex gloves. He had scratches on his face indicating even greater suspicion. Meanwhile, a medical examiner had completed an evaluation of India. They marked the cause of her death as blunt force trauma along with pressure on the neck, which was consistent with an assault. In addition, Tenniswood's DNA was found under India's fingernails, which confirms the version that he did something terrible to her. It was also clear to everyone that India did not give up without a fight and fought to the end, to the last second.
To think something like that's happened on my own doorstep, it's just destroys whoever's mother that is. My heart goes out to her because me having children, you just never wouldn't have thought that. Literally, I'm in shock, that much shock. It's hard to talk.
It makes you feel scared as to what else can go on. So it's not a very nice thing to happen. And I saw her picture on Facebook and she looked a lovely girl. to think that she's been killed. It's terrible.
A job at this pub. Her friends and the regulars have been remembering the girl they laughed and drank with.
And it was, it just saddened me at the thought of someone who's got all her life ahead of her to live has been sadly taken from us.
Mark Salter told me he'd last spoken to his friend just a week ago.
Personality-wise, fantastic. You know what I mean? She was a real people's person, and the community is saddened at her loss.
In just one day, police had learned of India's absence, discovered her body, found a huge amount of evidence, and arrested the man who was likely responsible. They now had to make sense of what had actually occurred before Tenniswood's trial would begin. By the start of Tenniswood's trial, police had gathered enough evidence for the prosecution to weave together the events that had occurred after Tenniswood had gotten into the cab with India. According to the cab driver, Tenniswood had instructed him to take them to 2 separate McDonald's locations, followed by a BP petrol station where Tenniswood left the car for a few minutes. During this time, India called her boyfriend once again. After his return, he instructed the taxi driver to take them to a location just a few hundred yards away from his home. There they exited the car. Tenniswood then escorted a disoriented, stumbling India into his home. Once inside, India sent multiple Snapchat messages to friends. They were pretty unintelligible, and she never received a reply. The police provided a chronology of the shocking murder, how the killer quickly escorted India chip chase from the club to his home. January 29, 11:30 p.m., India seen on CCTV entering NB's cocktail bar and club in Bridge Street, Northampton with friends. January 30, 12:15 a.m., India captured on security cameras inside the bar being helped up by her friend Alice Lewis after downing 6 Jaeger bomb cocktails. 12:39 a.m., India seen on CCTV slumped on the bar before dropping her handbag on the floor. 12:45 a.m., Miss Lewis tries to find India in NB's but fails to locate her. 12:58 a.m., India is separated from her friends and tells doorman Dave Burry, "I just want to go home." He escorts her outside to a taxi, but she becomes upset when the driver asks for money and gets out. 1:08 a.m., CCTV shows India stumbling outside. Mr. Burry walks back outside and India falls over onto him and tells her again, "I want to go home." He goes back inside but tells colleagues to keep an eye on her. 1:11 a.m., CCTV shows Tenniswood arriving and queuing outside NB's. He appears to glance at India, who is seen behind him pulling a locked car door believing it is a taxi. 1:13 a.m., Tenniswood approaches India, who is sitting down on the pavement crying on her phone. Tenniswood grips her arm and is overheard saying, "Don't worry, I'll get you home safe." 1:23 a.m., Tenniswood steers India towards a taxi rank. A witness overhears him telling her to put her phone away, for safety. 1:25 a.m., taxi driver is told by Tenniswood to take them to McDonald's. He pulls away down Bridge Street, where Tenniswood tells him to go to a different McDonald's. Tenniswood then tells the driver to pull over at a BP garage near his home, where he gets out of the car for 4 minutes. 1:28 a.m., India tries to call her boyfriend Grant Hare for the last time. 1:35 a.m., Tenniswood gets back in and directs the driver to the end of Stanley Road, but tells him to stop a few hundred yards away from his home. 1:40 a.m., witness Patrick Francis sees Tenniswood guiding India towards his house, 6 Stanley Road, before ushering her inside. 1:41 a.m., 1:49 a.m., India sends series of Snapchats, including one which read, "Where our club?" 3 a.m., India has been raped and strangled to death by Tenniswood. 3:10 a.m., Grant Hare tries to call India 3 times, but her phone rings out. 4 p.m., India fails to arrive for her job as a barmaid at the Collingtree Pub and Restaurant. Her parents report her missing, and a huge police search and social media campaign is launched. 9:30 p.m., CCTV footage shows Tenniswood entering the Ibis Hotel in Mayfair, Northampton after going for a kebab to clear his head. January 31, 3:22 a.m., Tenniswood uses the hotel computer to access news websites where he looked up the search for India. 3:38 a.m., Tenniswood leaves the hotel for around 30 minutes after staff are asked to call the police on an unrelated matter. 3:45 p.m., police break down door of 6 Stanley Road, Northampton, and find India's body on a mattress with her hair placed like a halo around her head. 6:47 p.m., police arrive at hotel and find Tenniswood watching TV in the lounge. He is arrested on suspicion of murder. He tells officers, "I'm surprised you were so quick. You didn't take very long to find me." After the painstaking work of the police, the trial began. The prosecution claimed that Tenniswood tried to start a relationship with India, knowing that at the time she did not have sufficient mental capacity to stop it. When India turned up at his house and tried to refuse Tenniswood's advances, he threw his arms around her neck in a rage. He did this until she stopped resisting, finishing the deed. According to the prosecution's chain of events, Tenniswood then left his home, checked into the nearby hotel, and drank and ate excessively until he was located by the police. His act was rageful, selfish, and unrelenting, choosing to end someone's life when they failed to adhere to his wishes. The defense, however, spun an entirely different story. In a rambling, gruesome account of the day's events, an account that spared no detail, Tenniswood explained how he had dated a multitude of highly successful women, keeping pictures of them in his home. One of these women, according to Tenniswood, was Heather Stewart White, a famous model. The killer of India Chipchase kept a chilling photograph of top fashion model Heather Stewart White, who bore a striking resemblance to his victim, India Chipchase. He told the jury, "I haven't had an immensely successful life, but I'm lucky enough to have had some very attractive girlfriends," one of whom was a very successful fashion model, actually. She's called Heather Stewart White, dated her at the end of the 1980 bordering into the 1990 before she went off to New York. She got married to Yannick Noah. Miss Stewart White, who later split from tennis ace Mr. Noah, denied ever knowing Tenniswood. Speaking from her $2 million home in Chiswick, West London, the 47-year-old said, "I have never heard of him. I don't know him. Do you know how many times, especially when I was modeling, people said they knew me?" He also kept pictures of girl band Little Mix, whom he bizarrely described as quite plain. It can now also be revealed that another woman who knew Tenniswood but cannot be named said he was a controlling man, violent and abusive when drunk. She claimed she woke up and found Eddie having sex with her on several occasions. The woman called the police on one occasion and Tenniswood was arrested for a fray, but she did not press charges and he was released. Another victim told the court Tenniswood throttled and kissed her when she was a teenager and said he also pinned her down and held a knife to her on another occasion. It can now be revealed she also alleged on another occasion when she was at a barbecue and Tenniswood was in drink. He became angry, chased her and pinned her down, but she managed to kick him and get away. Tenniswood had denied all the accusations and the judge ruled they were not strictly relevant to the case. The killer detailed that he had only planned to invite India to his home for a drink, despite the fact that eyewitnesses said they had repeatedly heard India say that she just wanted to come home. But after arriving at his home, the two had, according to him, loving, consensual relations, where India then asked him to place his hands around her neck. Tenniswood claimed that as a result of his inexperience and incompetence in this matter, he did not know that he was exerting too much pressure at these moments. He explained, "In my eagerness to please her, I either sustained the pressure too long or gripped too tightly." He believed that she had passed out as a result of it, and thinking she was okay, he then went to sleep for a few hours. When he awoke, he discovered that India was no longer breathing. He said he now realized what he had done. Disturbingly, he said he then cuddled up next to her for a few hours, but he then got hungry and left to get some food. This is when he arrived at the hotel, where he stayed until the police found him. The prosecution quickly shut down the story, calling it nonsense and saying Tenniswood was just an oddball. The way he had spoken while on the stand made it clear that he enjoyed every second of his recount of the events, leaving those who heard it squirming in their seats at his delight and disgusting detail. While the judge urged Tenniswood to keep his explanation short and sweet, he refused to listen. Ringing in the memory of what he had done, he wanted to bring a dummy into court to further illustrate his points, discussing how his body contained more wine than blood when he met India. As India's family members became increasingly upset by Tenniswood's testimony, the judge ordered the jurors to leave the courtroom, believing that they needed a break from Tenniswood's chilling account. After more hours of Tenniswood rambling, going off topic, and becoming angry when the judge and lawyers attempted to stop him, the prosecution needed to do little to argue against him. This man was revealing exactly who he was. It took the jury only 1 hour and 45 minutes to find Edward Tenniswood guilty of the assault and homicide of helpless India Chipchase. Her family wept as the verdict was read. During sentencing, the judge explained that the crime was one of utter depravity, obviously disgusted by what everyone had just heard.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's DCI Steve Holliter from the East Midlands Special Operations Team, Major Crime. I've got a short statement that I'll read out today. Firstly, I welcome the decision of the jury today. I thank them for the diligence and patience that they've shown over the last 2 weeks. Tenniswood's predatory behaviour and actions on the early hours of Saturday the 30th of January have left India's family totally devastated. I want to take this opportunity to publicly express mine and the force's condolence. India's family and friends have shown great strength and courage. Over the last 6 months, they've tried to come to terms with this terrible act. I also want to thank them for their help and patience to the investigation. India was a young, intelligent woman at the start of her life. She should have been able to enjoy a night out with friends and return home safely. It is clear that India was targeted by Tenniswood at a point in her life where she was most vulnerable and unable to defend herself. The actions, in my view, are of the worst predator. My lasting hope is that India's family is able to take some solace in the fact that Tenniswood will not be able to prey on any of the young women who are innocently going about their lives.
In an emotional video played to court, India Chipchase's father has told how he struggles to deal with the fact he'll never walk his daughter down the aisle. Sitting by a family photo of India, Jeremy Chipchase, a senior obstetrician and gynecologist at Lyle McEwen Hospital in Adelaide, he said,
I'm Jeremy Chipchase, father to India and her 3 siblings, Harry, Lulu and Pia. For 20 years, myself and her mother Sue loved India. We love her now and we will always love her. Even though we will never experience her smile, her laughter, her caring again, her photographs will adorn our walls, the memories of her 20 years will live on, and her spirit will always be in our hearts. Whatever happened that night, whatever stories are told, the fact is my daughter was murdered. I sincerely hope that there is no possibility that any other woman ever suffers at the hands of my daughter's murderer. Speaking from a father's perspective, I do not want any other father to hear that her daughter's gone missing like I did. And then for them to hear she's been found dead. No other father will therefore have to see the devastation that I have seen in Sue, Harry, Pia and Lulu's faces. No other father will have to see their daughter's body in the mortuary and be told they are unable to touch her or kiss her one last time. No other father will have to carry her coffin into a church with his son. And no other father will have to see her mother and siblings grief at the church service. No other father will have to touch the coffin and say, "Love you, Ind," and then see the curtain close at a crematorium. And no other father will be hit with a wave of emotion at a wedding, as I was, on realising that I would never walk India down the aisle. I'm sure that I and other family members will continue to have moments like this of pain, anguish, emotion until we take a last breath. I therefore reiterate, I do not want there to be other victims at the hands of India's murderer, and therefore no other families to experience what we have. I hope that the sentencing reflects this.
Tenniswood was sentenced to life in prison, ordered to serve a minimum of 30 years. He will be 82 years old when and if he is eligible for release. The killer's lawyer, who defended him, said, Edward Tenniswood received threats of strangulation from other prisoners. They said they were going to drag this sick bastard into the shower.
A chilling mystery lurked beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows of everyday life. A seemingly ordinary man with a gambling addiction and a facade of respectability hid dark secrets within his seemingly mundane existence. His life took a sinister turn one September day when he seized a rare opportunity to indulge his twisted desires. A young girl, unaware of the danger, crossed paths with him on her way home from school. What began as a chance encounter soon escalated into a horrific crime that would elude justice for years. The man had carefully planned his actions, driven by an all-consuming obsession. His calculated cruelty left no trace of the victim as he skillfully disposed of her remains, hoping to erase his heinous act from memory. The investigation into the disappearance seemed to stall. Determined to uncover the hidden horrors, law enforcement stepped up their efforts. An undercover operation was launched, with agents infiltrating the suspect's life by posing as a friend and colleague. The story, full of twists and betrayals, continues to resonate, a chilling testament to the length some will go to hide their true selves. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Kruger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. What do we know about Georgine Kruger and her family? Georgine Kruger, better known as Gina, was born in Munich on April 11, 1992. She was the middle child of 3 in a simple home. Tommy was her older brother and 8 years older than her. Michelle was her younger sister and 2.5 years younger than her. Gina's parents split up when she was 11 years old, and her 19-year-old brother chose to live with their father. The girls were mostly raised by their mother, Vesna, and their grandma on their mom's side after the divorce. You could tell that both girls were artistic because they did well in school, danced, and played music. The family didn't have much money, and the father kept in touch with his ex-wife and girls, but he was more focused on helping his older son, who he sent to school and helped in other ways. There was a good job offer for Vesna in Berlin, so she went there with her mother and daughters in June 2006. The family moved into house number 8 on Stendal Street in the Moabit neighborhood. The girls went to one of the best schools in the area on September 1. It was in a different district, but they could get there by bus. The new job made Vesna very happy, and she had big plans for the future. But soon, the family's calm and peaceful life was upended. Since she was a child, she wanted to be an actor. Gina really took singing and dancing very seriously, and did them with all her heart. She saw Indian movies that made her want to be an actress, so she took acting and stage speech classes and participated eagerly in school theater. Teachers who worked with Gina when she was young said that she definitely had the right skills and predicted that she would be successful and famous in the future. The girl was also very tall for her age, had a thin, feminine body, and had a bright, expressive face. She carefully looked after herself by following fashion trends and trying to dress in a stylish way. She also used makeup skillfully and wisely for decoration. It's important to note that Gina did her own makeup as well as skilled makeup artists. In fact, she did a lot of makeup for her friends and neighbors in Munich. During the summer break, she spent a lot of time in Berlin going to castings and trying to get roles in movies and on TV. There were a few times when she was in crowd scenes, but they were very unremarkable. But on Friday, September 22, 2006, she finally got lucky. She put in an audition for a guest part on the TV show English for Beginners, and she was chosen. Gina was meant to get a call back on September 25 to confirm that she would be in the cast, go over some details, and ask her to sign a contract. The new pretty girl in town made a big deal at her new school from the very first day. All the boys in her class were crazy about her. She had a hard time getting along with the girls, though, because they were jealous of her and saw her as a rival. Her peers were slow to include her in their group and didn't want to talk to her. Gina avoided arguments and tried to talk to everyone in the class, even though she was outgoing, nice, and honest. The teenage girl was really pretty, and she could dance and sing really well. A modeling agency even asked her to try out as a picture model. She agreed, but she never showed up for the picture shoot that was supposed to happen in early October. Gina hoped that one day she could get to Hollywood and act in movies. She imagined herself walking the red carpets of major film festivals with famous people. She wanted fame, attention, and film awards, and she was ready to put in a lot of work to get what she wanted. The girl almost did it, but all of a sudden she vanished a few miles from home, leaving no one to find her. She had no qualms about her role in the TV series, but the schoolgirl was waiting for confirmation. Georgina's only thought for the whole weekend was the impending call from the studio, which would determine her destiny. She could already picture herself on the set, practicing her lines. She was thrilled and motivated. She left for school as usual in the morning on Monday, September 25. Since the call was anticipated in the late afternoon, Gina urged her grandma to take any calls, vowing not to loiter anywhere since she was due to arrive home by 2 in the afternoon. For Gina, the day seemed to go on forever. Her peers observed that she was unable to concentrate on her studies and was often checking the time. Because she hadn't disclosed to anyone that she was in the audition, everyone had a different explanation for her nervousness. After packing up her things, Gina rushed to the closest bus stop, boarded bus number 27, which she took every day, and rode home. She rode 3 stops before getting off at her stop, which was close to her home, but she never returned home, disappearing from sight halfway between her apartment and the bus stop. Gina simply disappeared from sight. No one saw her. The grandmother was waiting for her granddaughters to come home from school. Gina was supposed to come home at 2 p.m., and the grandmother had already prepared dinner and set the table. Michelle had extra classes at a music school that day, so she was supposed to come home a little later than Gina. However, Jean didn't show up, which was quite unusual, since she was eagerly awaiting the call and didn't intend to be late. The grandmother and Michelle became worried when she returned home at 3 p.m. The grandmother tried to call Gina to find out where she had disappeared to, but the teenager had turned off his phone. Her attempts to get reached again were unsuccessful. Visna's concern increased, and she knew something bad had happened when she got home from work and discovered her daughter was missing and her phone was inaccessible. The mother called the school as soon as possible and was told that Gina had attended every class and had taken the customary bus home. Subsequently, the mother got in touch with many friends of her daughter, with the hope that the girls had just happened to catch up or had made a stop at a cafe on their way back home. However, they said that Gina had gone home immediately and was in a hurry. A 14-year-old girl had disappeared, and her worried mother and grandmother rushed to the police station to report it. However, law enforcement was initially hesitant, believing that the schoolgirl could have gone on a date, visited a friend, or had a fight with a classmate, and was sulking in the park alone. Police checked accident reports and called hospitals, figuring that the girl could have gotten into trouble, been injured, or been hurt on her way home from school. Police ruled out all other possibilities and confirmed that the teenager was not present at any of the expected locations. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. It turned out that the girl was last seen at the bus stop when she exited the bus and turned onto the street leading to her home. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The Kruger family home on Stendhal Street became the starting point for the search. A search party with dogs trained to detect human scents was sent there. At that point, there was still a chance to find the teenage girl alive and well. Law enforcement searched every house, talked to all the residents and witnesses, looked into attics and basements, talked to employees of nearby cafes and shops, but Gina had disappeared without a trace. The dogs were unable to track her trail. Flyers with photos of the schoolgirl and appeals for any information about her were posted all over the city by the following morning. Numerous calls to the police station reported seeing a schoolgirl with a similar appearance in different places of the city. Unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. At the same time, detectives began checking all local residents who had been convicted in the past and those who were released on bail. Special attention was paid to criminals and those who showed an unhealthy interest in children. But all these efforts were in vain. It seemed that the schoolgirl had disappeared without a trace and would never return home, as if there was no evidence of her presence, no personal belongings or clues. The investigation was suspended after months of fruitless searching, because there were no leads, no clues, and no idea what to do next. However, a year after Gina's disappearance, the police received a call from an anonymous caller who said that the girl's body was at the bottom of a local lake. Despite not being able to identify the caller, authorities decided to look into the information and reopen the investigation. Expert divers searched the lake bed for several weeks with state-of-the-art equipment. They definitely looked at every square inch, but they were unable to locate any evidence of Jin. Even if the lead was untrue, it sparked renewed interest in the case among the general public. It was decided to carry out another search, because the missing girl was being aggressively discussed and written about in the media once more. Search dogs were brought in, and neighbors were re-interviewed by the police. Though it was obvious that none of this would probably help, there was minimal chance of success because the dogs had not detected the girl's smell on the day she vanished. A year later, investigators were sure that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Kruger family refused to believe it. Visna came up with a legend that her daughter had run away somewhere and was now acting in films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed of. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her youngest daughter. The search was resumed from time to time, and in 2016, about 10 years after the girl disappeared, a resident of Stendhal Street complained to the police about a neighbor who was aggressively luring minors to his home. It turned out that this neighbor was Ali K., a 38-year-old Turkish immigrant. Although he tried to project an image of a model family man to those around him, he was not a model family man, despite the fact that he was legally married and raising 3 children. The police conducted a more detailed study of Ali's characteristics, and it turned out that he had been under investigation for 4 years. The police were shocked, as it turned out that he had seduced a local teenage girl with the promise of selling her a stylish smartphone for a symbolic amount. He took the girl to his storage room, located in the basement of an apartment building, hit her on the head, and forced her to have sex. He then made the teenager swear that she would not tell anyone about what had happened. He then gave her a paper tissue to wipe away her tears and helped her tidy herself up before leaving. The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident. Together, they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl described the man's basement in detail, noting that it most closely resembled a maniac's lair. The following day, Ali was taken into custody, but he fiercely denied any culpability and gave his own account of what happened. He said that the girl herself had indicated that she would like to purchase the device, and that he was in fact selling it. They descended together because the smartphone was in his cupboard in the basement. The visitor claimed to have always dreamed of such a contraption after looking over it. She was willing to make a different payment method, though, because she lacked the funds to pay. Ali claims that after that, the girl started kissing him and undressing, and he tried to talk sense into her. She struck her head as he violently shoved her aside. This accounted for the bumps and wounds on her body. However, since the man used a contraceptive that he subsequently threw away, it was impossible to show that they were intimate. Melik Ali's wife not only backed her husband wholeheartedly, but also started accusing the girl of acting indecently and trying to woo her husband. In the end, the man who had caused moderate bodily harm was only given a suspended sentence. However, once the police reopened their investigation into Georgina Kruger's disappearance, they decided to question him thoroughly once again. Ali survived on odd jobs and welfare payments, mainly because he had no regular job. He was a heavy gambler and often went into debt. He often went to the coffee shop on the ground floor of his house, where he met new people and received food and drinks as gifts. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, asked them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali was the closest thing to a kidnapper as Georgina Kruger, but the police had no connection with him in the case up until that point. Nevertheless, the Georgine Kruger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K. was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It found out that his basement had been examined, and he and other neighbors had been questioned 10 years prior. But in particular, there had been no need to examine Ali's storage room. Residents claimed that the door was usually locked, meaning that only the owner could access it. At that time, Ali had been one of the most involved and actively participating members of the search effort. The police chose to keep Ali under observation in order to gather as much information about him, even though they had nothing specific to accuse him with. All of his phone conversations were recorded, and unofficial surveillance was set up. This soon yielded preliminary results, and investigators found that the man had large obligations that his wife was unaware of. After losing over 10,000 euros in a poker game, he was clueless about how to get out of this situation. The decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent, codenamed Hakan, was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans and details with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned that they needed to find a manager soon, noting that it was a well-paying position and it was important to choose wisely. After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee. When suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table, he took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role. He then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly. Their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect. As the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer, he boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. After a few months, the investigation chose to add another agent after determining that the case was not moving further. A female would portray Hakan's girlfriend this time. Susan entered the narrative at this point with the intention of becoming friends with Ali's wife, Melik, and trying to find out whatever secrets her husband might be holding. After just a few get-togethers, the four of them began interacting with one another as a family. Melik was a friendly person who thought her husband was almost a saint. She had ignored his adultery for years, disregarded the schoolgirl's allegations of violence against him, and believed her husband to be a decent man who was simply unlucky in his employment. And she dreamed that life would change for the better. Soon Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Kruger case, and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind. She quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Melik knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The K family became so friendly with the agents that they even trusted them with their children. Ali made an effort to appear sincere and moral, and his wife probably did not know about the misdeed that her husband had committed. It was becoming more and more difficult and expensive for the police to maintain cover. To avoid becoming suspicious, the agents even had to draw up a fictitious employment contract and rent premises for the declared auto repair shop. The investigation then took a desperate last step by introducing another agent, who would play a villainous role. According to the backstory, his name was Kor. He was Hakan's cousin, had a criminal record, and was running some underground business. It was hoped that Ali, meeting a kindred spirit, would open up and confess his sins. The men quickly bonded over their shared interests. Kor treated his new friend to drinks, and together they visited various clubs and houses of ill repute. The new friend confessed that he made money through not entirely legal means, and thus wanted to spend it indulgently, with Ali willingly helping him in this. Kor also complained about his girlfriend all the time, saying he was unable to quit their relationship because she was blackmailing him, and threatening to report his illicit business to the authorities. He claimed that she was getting more and more hungry, and that she was often requesting money. One day, while drinking with his friend Ali, Kor announced that he was going to take drastic measures to get rid of the annoying and blackmailing girlfriend, and that he would pay 100,000 euros to whoever did the dirty work. At this point, Ali perked up and suggested that he do the job himself. His friend accepted, but advised that when sober, they talk about the specifics in a private setting. In November 2017, sitting in the car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Kaur doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken the life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot. He continued his story. On a warm September day, the street was surprisingly quiet and empty when the girl was returning from school. Seeing his chance, Ali invited the girl who lived next door to help him take out some things from his storage. She kindly agreed, feeling safe. He closed the basement door when they entered, and when he tried to kiss her, she screamed and refused. After that, he hit her to knock her down and began to take advantage of her. He held her by the throat as hard as he could, and at some point, afraid that she would complain about him to the police, he pressed even harder. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. However, no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Kaur's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste at the landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. Before a definitive verdict was rendered in this case, the proceedings continued for an additional 2 years. The culprit insisted that he had made up the whole tale to win Kaur's trust, and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Apart from the criminal's own confession, no additional proof was discovered, but his dramatic and in-depth testimony was sufficient to persuade the jury of this man's guilt. Almost 14 years after Georgine Kruger vanished in March 2020, Ali K. received a life sentence without the chance of parole. His wife Melik never believed that her husband was guilty of doing this. She convinced herself that he set himself up, pursuing the noble goal of helping a friend.
A woman full of dreams and hopes found herself caught in a web of violence that would ultimately claim her life. The darkness that surrounded her grew thicker with each passing day as the criminals plotted their next move. With each step, the shadows seemed to draw closer, closing in on her fragile existence. The night of the attack was a chilling reminder of the lengths these criminals would go to. In a moment of horrific violence, her home was transformed into a scene of chaos and despair. The sound of gunshots shattered the silence, and a life that was once full of promise came to an abrupt end. The attackers left a trail of blood and destruction in their wake, their actions driven by a ruthless desire for revenge. CCTV footage and encrypted messages revealed the criminals' meticulous planning and their attempts to evade capture. This is a story about a life turned into a nightmare because of a chance encounter. How organized crime has impacted and destroyed the lives of innocent people. Together, we will examine the chilling story of Ashley Dale, a young woman who unwittingly found herself drawn into violent clashes in the criminal world. We will learn about cruelty, betrayal, retribution, and the secrets of swindlers who do not care about human life. Ashley Dale is a young woman from Liverpool, England, a port city of approximately 600,000 people, located on the eastern side of the Mersey estuary, next to the Irish Sea, and approximately 178 miles, 286 kilometers, from London. She was beautiful, smart, and ambitious. Ashley had a great job, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of her. But a fateful encounter with a man from the criminal underworld changed everything. Ashley Dale was born into a wealthy, healthy family in Liverpool, United Kingdom. At an early age, she experienced her parents' divorce. From her mother's first marriage, Ashley had 2 younger sisters. Later, her mother began a relationship with Rob Jones, and soon they started living together. A boy was born into the family. Close friends described Ashley as a beautiful, smart, and charismatic girl. From a young age, she dreamed of achieving success and building a brilliant career. Ashley relentlessly pursued her goal despite obstacles. Tragedy struck the family in November 2015 when Ashley's younger brother, 16-year-old Lewis was killed. He was brutally shot while walking along a canal in Liverpool. The criminals mistook Lewis for a member of a rival gang simply because of his curly hair. Lewis's death was a heavy blow to Ashley, but she found the strength to overcome the pain and fear. In 2017, Ashley graduated from university with a degree in environmental studies. Immediately after graduation, she got a job as an environmental cleanup specialist at Council Zero. Here, Ashley demonstrated her determination, ability to solve complex problems, and work in a team. The girl devoted a lot of time and effort to her work, but at the same time, she always looked impeccable. Ashley easily found common ground with those around her, thanks to her calm but confident nature. She devoted her free time to friends and family. This was a real outlet for her during a period of stressful workdays. Ashley's efforts and successes did not go unnoticed by the company's management, and soon the girl was promoted. This was the fulfillment of the dream she had been striving for so long. Despite successes in her career, Ashley Dale's personal life periodically experienced unpleasant upheavals. She was dating a guy named Lee Harrison, who in many respects was her complete opposite. Despite this, the couple lived together for over 5 years. While Ashley had a stable job and built a successful career, her boyfriend never officially worked. At the same time, he was earning a decent income, the origin of which Ashley did not know. The girl's parents did not approve of her relationship with a questionable guy who was hiding something, but they showed patience so as not to spoil the relationship with their daughter. They also believed that this couple had no future and that their daughter's chosen one was not the person who could become a decent husband and loving father. Ashley must have sensed a tragedy coming. At one point, she started hinting to her boyfriend about a possible breakup, but he insisted otherwise. Lee assured her that he was ready to get married and start a family. Despite his persistence, the girl hesitated. In June 2022, 28-year-old Ashley and her boyfriend went to the famous Glastonbury Festival. It was here that the girl was destined to encounter a whole group of representatives of the criminal world. To the festival came Lee Harrison's friends from the underworld. In fact, he was a member of a gang group where he was called SC. Lee had his own group of gangsters known as the Hillsiders. One of Lee's friends, named Sean, quarreled with his girlfriend at the festival. She joined Lee and Ashley's company at a party. This infuriated another criminal, Neil Barry, nicknamed Branch, who was at odds with Lee. When Neil saw the girl with competitors from an enemy gang, he flew into a rage. Barry couldn't calm down for a long time. Then he pulled out a large knife and began wandering around the festival grounds, threatening Lee. In this situation, Ashley was very frightened for herself and her boyfriend. The girl described to her friends the inadequate behavior of the young people from the warring groups. According to her, she personally saw Neil pull out a large knife and say he wanted to stab Lee. The enmity between the guys played a big role in all of this. The parties recalled old grievances, in particular, the theft of a large batch of drugs from Barry 3 years ago, which Neil suspected Lee's involvement in. Ashley was very alarmed by what had happened. She feared for the fate of her loved one because the tension between the gangs seemed to have reached a boiling point and could turn into a real war. Ashley Dale had returned from Glastonbury Festival with a persistent sense of unease. Even though she had nothing to do with the criminal groups, she came to understand that she had ended up in the middle of their battle. The girl witnessed how, during the event, Neil Barry threatened Lee Harrison with a huge knife after becoming enraged. She was shocked, remembering that situation and marveling at how dangerous these people could be. In July 2022, Ashley shared her experiences with her friend Sophie. She said that Neil Barry attacked his acquaintance, Ian Fitz. This news further alarmed the girl because it turned out that the enmity over the drug theft 3 years ago had not actually disappeared. Ashley explained to her friend her view of the situation. She did not want to intervene in someone else's conflict and was not going to take anyone's side. Moreover, the girl remembered that once Neil and Lee were good friends. However, in recent years, Barry had repeatedly approached Harrison, trying to get compensation for the stolen drugs. Each time, Lee asked for a deferment, complaining about a lack of funds. In fact, as Ashley knew, he had money. He just didn't want to give it to Neil. Lee explained that he should not be responsible for the actions of other members of his group, while he himself had nothing to do with the robbery. All this led to threats. In anger, Neil promised to come to the couple's house and deal with Lee, but then it all ended in nothing. In her messages, Ashley expressed fears that she had found herself surrounded by criminal elements because of her boyfriend, Lee. She was afraid that the anger of the bandits could also be directed against her because, at the festival, she was seen with the leader of the enemy group. "It just causes me a lot of anxiety. I'm constantly worried that something will happen. Neil is threatening him and all that. Is he eventually going to do something with Lee? I just couldn't handle it. Neil says he's going to come and do something," Ashley wrote to a friend. The girl admitted that she literally looks over her shoulder when she walks down the street. She thought she noticed Neil peeking out from behind a tree at the funeral of their mutual acquaintance, Eric Warwick, who committed suicide shortly after the festival. "I just don't want to go to Lee's funeral next. I just have a bad feeling about all this. I'm constantly very tense. My nerves are shot to hell. When I'm in the car with Lee, I just feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder," she shared her fears. Ashley's friend Sophie admitted that, in fact, it's not over yet. Because Sophie knew Neil well, and she repeatedly witnessed his aggressive behavior. He was extremely annoyed by the act involved in the theft of drugs. It seemed that everything could get out of control. In a conversation with Sophie, Ashley admitted that she sees only one way out of this situation. She was going to talk to her boyfriend Lee Harrison about his connections to the criminal world. The girl hoped to convince her boyfriend to protect her from other bandits so that he would tell everyone that she was not part of their social circle. Ashley wanted Lee to solve the problem and pay off the debt. In her opinion, this would allow us to break out of this vicious circle. After Eric's funeral, everyone went to the wake at the nearest restaurant. It was here that Lee wanted to meet with Barry to settle the conflict. However, the girl insisted that this was not the time to do so while the situation was so tense. At that moment, relations between the rival groups were on the verge of open hostility. Lee repeatedly received threatening messages, so Ashley feared that any meeting with his gangsters could become fatal for the guy. About 3 weeks passed after the funeral. During this time, the bandits calmed down a bit, but as it turned out, it was only an appearance. The tension continued to mount, and Ashley realized that she was in an extremely dangerous situation. She tried to shield herself from her boyfriend's problems, but the past wouldn't let her go. It seemed that a tragic day was inevitable, and the girl would not be able to avoid the fate of a victim in a brutal war of criminals. In late July 2022, disappointed and tired of the constant stress, Ashley decided to break up with Lee. Despite Lee's persistence in saying he was ready to get married, Ashley still dared to leave him. The girl hoped that this would help her avoid trouble and start a new, peaceful life. However, Lee wasn't too upset and almost immediately started dating another girl, Jordan Thompson, who was a friend of Sean, with whom he had a conflict at Glastonbury. Jordan was the same girl who infuriated the bandits by switching to a member of the enemy group when her boyfriend was beaten. Naturally, Sean was not going to put up with such a situation. He could not forgive the betrayal. As a result, on July 22, Sean wrote to Neil offering to smash Lee's car together to get revenge on him. The bandit believed that Lee's girl was also responsible for his humiliating beating at the concert. Moreover, he blamed the ex for the death of their mutual friend, Eric Warwick. Despite the breakup, Ashley was still connected to many people from the gangster circle. She knew them personally and saw how the tension in the group was growing. The girl was afraid that the anger of the criminals could also be directed against her because at the festival, she was with the leader of the enemy group. During the summer, Ashley often corresponded with friends. In many messages, she expressed fear for her life. Sometimes it resembled real paranoia. She was sure she was being followed by people from the gang. Despite the creepy feelings, she did not go to the police, perhaps fearing to infuriate the bandits even. On August 20, 2022, Ashley Dale was relaxing at home after work. Around 8:40 p.m., she heard the alarm go off in her car. At that time, she was texting with her mother and informed her about what had happened. According to the woman, over the next few minutes, her daughter wrote that the dog had begun to get nervous. Ashley said that she herself felt a growing anxiety. At 11:51 p.m., she sent her mom a photo in which she was holding her dog in her arms. The girl attributed her anxiety to the seeming surveillance and recent events involving gangsters and her ex-boyfriend, Unfortunately, she had no idea that the killer was very close. At 12:30, neighbor Ashley Dale heard a loud noise in the apartment. The neighbor said, "The girl was screaming very hard." A few seconds later, witnesses saw the girl run out the back door and fall to the ground in the courtyard. They immediately called the rescue service, reporting a noise in the house across the street that sounded like a series of gunshots and that the wounded owner of the apartment had run out. Law enforcement officers quickly arrived at the scene. Inside the house, police found an eerie scene and a lot of disorder. Cartridges were scattered everywhere. The walls and floor were riddled with bullets. In the living room, the police noticed a bloody trail that led them to the backyard. There, on the ground, lay the still alive wounded Ashley. Emergency services who arrived at the scene tried to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The girl was loaded into an ambulance in critical condition and taken to the nearest hospital. But unfortunately, doctors were unable to save her, and Ashley Dale died from multiple gunshot wounds. As the examination showed, the first bullet tore through the liver, the second passed through the abdomen, and the third hit the right ventricle of the heart. The wild shooting resulted in injuries incompatible with life. Police found that an unknown assailant had punctured the tires on Ashley's car and also tried to set it on fire. Obviously, in this way, the owner of the car was to be lured out into the street. The killers waited for her for some time, but realizing that the girl would stay at home, they decided to attack. Around 12:30 a.m., the attacker kicked the front door in. An unknown man in a mask burst into the house with a loaded Scorpion machine pistol. It is a fully automatic weapon. With one press of the trigger, you can fire an entire magazine. The girl tried to escape, but the criminal shot her about 10 times. After that, the attacker went up to the bedroom and randomly fired 5 more times into the bed. Apparently, he expected that there would be witnesses, or was looking for another victim. The police managed to find many witnesses to the attack, as well as witnesses to the criminal's escape from the scene of the massacre. Several people immediately saw the car that drove up to the house. Guys got out of it and started cutting tires. It's strange that none of the witnesses tried to report this to the police. Probably everyone was very scared. Immediately after the massacre, the criminals jumped into the car and drove off into the night. It was later identified as a Hyundai i30N. To find the car, the police viewed almost 1,000 hours of CCTV footage across the city. As a result, the investigators calculated the car and ran it through the databases. It turned out that the car was purchased just 6 days before the murder. Its owner turned out to be James Witham, a friend and accomplice of Neil Barry. Before buying a new car, James Witham drove his old Audi. One of the first people police spoke to was Ashley's ex-boyfriend, Lee Harrison. According to him, on the night of the attack, he was riding in a taxi to a party and did not hear the calls. At that time, the police were already convinced that Neil Barry and his friend were involved in the massacre. However, Lee himself was not convinced of this, focusing on the fact that they had been friends for a long time. In fact, they had no motive to attack a girl who was not involved in anything at all. The young man was very reluctant to cooperate, so he provided practically no valuable information to the detectives. Subsequently, the investigators described his behavior and attitude towards Ashley as cold. It seemed that he was not at all upset by the death of his ex-girlfriend. Lee turned out to be one of the least helpful witnesses during the investigation. The police found out that the bandit killer did not commit the crime against the girl alone. Several people planned the attack with him: 29-year-old Joseph Pierce and 26-year-old Neil Barry. They were able to calculate them thanks to mobile phone data. The criminal's car drove up to the house shortly before the murder. They were tracked practically all over the city thanks to CCTV footage. Interestingly, before the crime, they calmly went to the store in a good mood, and a little later, they cold-bloodedly massacred an innocent girl. In addition, forensic scientists were able to find a lot of evidence at the site of the attack. James left his DNA on one of the cartridges when he was loading the weapon. Subsequently, traces were found on the shell casing in the victim's house. Shoe prints were also found. They completely coincided with the sneakers that were on the killer. As it turned out, he purchased them less than 2 days before the crime. The main task for the detectives was to find the criminals as soon as possible. During the investigation, it was found that Neil Barry tried to leave the country and go on the run. He wanted to do it, but was afraid of attention from the authorities. To divert suspicion and confuse the police, he communicated with Sean using encryption. In the dialogues, he was a man named Gaz. The deception was quickly exposed thanks to modern surveillance tools. In the form of a cipher, the criminals discussed what needed to be done in order to escape and where to go. On August 23 at 5:43 a.m., the criminals completed their operations. On August 24, Neil Barry was spotted on CCTV footage. He stopped by briefly to see his girlfriend named Lucy. He left her almost immediately. After that, she left the house and went to the same place where her boyfriend told her to go. The police realized that this was the last chance to catch the leader of the criminal group. The detectives assumed that the killer was going to spend the last night with the girl. Both arrived at the hotel around 10:45 p.m. The next morning, Neil planned to leave the country early. On the morning of August 24, officers broke into the hotel room. Here, the main suspect, Neil, was found to have $2,000, as well as a foreign passport. He was going to fly to New York. The man was arrested and taken to the police station for interrogation. Neil, like Lee, was reluctant to cooperate with the police, but was able to provide some valuable information. According to him, on August 21, he was with his friends, including Sean, at his apartment. Here, they watched mixed martial arts on TV. A little later, the police detained Sean and thoroughly checked his mobile phone and computer. It turned out that the conspirators were engaged in large-scale criminal activities related to New York. That is why the criminal element was going to flee there in order to continue his dark business. They were engaged in providing secure communication channels for mobile phones. It is clear that such methods are most often used for criminal affairs. They themselves used closed communication channels, which the police managed to decipher. As it turned out, the criminals were supplying hundreds of customers with substances in especially large quantities. We were talking about a really large organization. Neil's gang operated in North Wales and used burner phones to communicate. About 165 clients of these people were exposed. In addition, they were involved in the distribution of firearms. The bandits repeatedly bought and sold pistols, even assault rifles, for example, AK-47. This is how the criminals managed to get their hands on the Scorpion machine pistol with which Ashley Dale was killed. Thus, the police found out where all the means for committing the crime came from. On October 9, a month and a half after the tragic massacre, 28-year-old Shah Zeiss, 26-year-old Neil Barry, 29-year-old Joseph Pierce, and James Witham were charged with conspiracy and the murder of Ashley Dale. In November, the trial began. Throughout 2023, a gang feud that began during a music festival was heard. All this allowed the jury to understand how tense the situation was and in what conditions the girl found herself. The evidence base was also considered. On the basis of CCTV footage, forensic examination, mobile phone data, and witness testimony, the prosecution insisted that Neil Barry and Sean Zeiss sought revenge on Lee Harrison, which was especially aggravated after the death of their mutual friend, Eric Warwick. The evidence was very convincing and left no doubt as to the guilt of these criminals. The story of Ashley Dale is a tragic example of how the showdown between representatives of organized crime can take the life of an innocent person. A girl who dreamed of a successful career and a happy life became an accidental victim of cruel and senseless revenge between gangs. Unfortunately, Ashley found herself at the very center of a criminal conflict because of her relationship with Lee Harrison. She had nothing to do with the criminal world, but found herself drawn into a deadly, dangerous game. The girl felt a growing threat and tried to break out of this vicious circle by breaking off relations with Lee. However, this did not save her from a tragic fate. The investigation into the murder of Ashley Dale showed how deeply organized crime had penetrated the life of Liverpool. Gangs involved in drug trafficking and the distribution of weapons stop at nothing for the sake of revenge and the elimination of competitors. At the same time, they do not disdain using the most cruel methods, such as attacking a house and shooting with automatic weapons. On November 20, the jury found all four guilty of murdering the girl, conspiring against Harrison, and possessing weapons. As a result, Sean Zeiss was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than after 42 years. Neil Barry received a life sentence with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 47 years. Joseph Pierce will spend 41 years in prison, and James Witham will spend 43 years. The fact that virtually all members of the criminal group involved in the murder of Ashley received life sentences indicates the seriousness of their crime and the determination of law enforcement agencies in the fight against banditry. However, the tragedy itself shows that this struggle is not enough, and society should pay more attention to the prevention of crime and the support of youth. The story of Ashley Dale transcends a mere account of crime. It serves as a powerful message for all of us. It underscores the delicate nature of human life when confronted with the harsh realities of cruelty and violence. This tragic event urges us to come together in the pursuit of a safer and more just society, where every individual can pursue their aspirations without the looming fear of falling victim to criminal acts. Ashley Dale's memory should stand as a beacon, reminding us of the vital need for humanity, empathy, and collective strength.
Hello, friends. Today, we look at another tragic case. In a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, a dark and disturbing story began to unfold that would captivate the entire city and beyond. The facade of a seemingly ordinary life was about to crack, revealing layers of deceit, betrayal, and a chilling crime. It all began with a woman who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a haunting secret. When the truth began to emerge, it was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The investigation into her disappearance uncovered a tangled web of lies and manipulation, drawing attention to a seemingly ordinary family whose lives were anything but ordinary. The details of the crime painted a horrific picture, leading to a harrowing discovery that would forever change the lives of those involved. With each new discovery, the case grew more complex and tragic, highlighting the dark side of human nature and the lengths some will go to protect their own. What started as a fairy tale ended as a horror film. On May 13, 1989, Ekaterina Bauman was born in Leningrad. Now it is the city of St. Petersburg, one of the largest cities in Russia. In 2009, 20-year-old Ekaterina met Walter Bauman, a German citizen. Walter studied in Germany and earned a living, but his personal life was not going smoothly. Although he did not fit the definition of an ideal man, he was always looking and dreaming of meeting the one. He lived with his parents, did not care about his appearance, dressed sloppily, and was generally unattractive. He often wrote to women online and met them often, but they all then broke off communication with him. And so, after exchanging long messages with one of them, he decided to go to Russia to see her in person. Ekaterina was attractive and young. She must have had many admirers, but for some reason she chose Walter. They went on holiday to Turkey together. After their vacation together, Walter returned to Germany, and Ekaterina returned to Russia, but they continued to communicate on social networks and called each other on the phone. He would tell his friends how wonderful and sweet she was, how they would talk on the phone for hours and exchange poems. Then he would spend a lot of money traveling to see her in St. Petersburg sometimes. Ekaterina was a second-year student at the time. Walter helped her transfer to the University of Hamburg because he was sincere in his goals. Thus, Ekaterina emigrated to Germany in 2010 from Russia. Neighbors in Bremerhaven, Germany, a port city on the North Sea coast, described Ekaterina as a bright, pretty, and cheerful young lady. She maintained close ties with her Russian relatives even after the move. She resumed her studies in business administration in Germany. She was an avid runner and yoga practitioner who constantly sought out quiet places. The couple married a few months later. According to a family friend, they had a lavish wedding. I used to be a wedding photographer, so I've seen a lot, but Ekaterina was the most beautiful and happy bride I've ever seen. The celebration cost them a lot of money, of course. The registration took place at a lighthouse, from where they set off on a huge, white, horse-drawn carriage. No one had ever seen anything like that in Germany. There were very few guests, which seemed a little strange. The wedding was over long before dawn. Their wedding photo captures a happy image. It looked like two people who are a perfect match have finally found each other. The couple stepped into a happy family life, and their story seemed like a fairy tale, except instead of a luxurious castle, the newlyweds moved into Walter's parents' home. And this is the moment Ekaterina had her first problem since moving to Germany. It was difficult to coexist with Walter's parents. the fable began to come apart. Mother Walter was an extremely strict woman. Her story of travel has inspired several immigrants in Germany, so her collection of 30 photographs and a 1-meter-long portrait are on display on the facade of the immigration center in Bremerhaven, Germany. But Ludmila could not believe that her son Walter was now a grown man in his 30s and not a small child. She called him every hour when he was not around, asking when he would be back, where he was, and who he was with. She did not have a healthy distance from him because he was her only child. Ludmila often criticized Ekaterina and meddled in her son's marriage. She accused her of being a terrible housekeeper. Ekaterina made an effort to oppose this mindset, but her efforts were never fruitful. She changed into a gray mouse when she walked outside. If not, her mother-in-law would have to tell her that she was dressing like a prostitute. Walter earned about 4,000 euros a month working at the port. He had funds that he did not want to spend, saving most of his earnings. When Ekaterina became pregnant in 2017, Walter decided to use some of his savings. Walter wanted to spend as little money as possible, so the house search took some time. They moved out of her parents' house and into a house he bought. After the move, things did not work out as Ekaterina had hoped. Ludmila was a frequent visitor to their home and persistently interfered in all aspects of her son's life. The couple's relationship deteriorated further around the same time that Ekaterina gave birth to a daughter. After the birth of his daughter, Walter increased his control over his spouse. He forbade her from learning to drive and did not allow her to speak Russian to the child, as he wanted her to speak only German. Ekaterina was clueless as to the significance of her husband's behavioral shifts. He developed even greater levels of resentment, jealousy, and control. It was becoming more difficult to anticipate the behavioral shifts in him. Any minor, unimportant thing could cause him to lose his fury. As their marriage grew more strained, Walter even went so far as to abuse his wife, utilizing his physical might against her. Authorities first became aware of the Baumann family at the end of 2019 due to reports of domestic abuse. However, the matter was promptly dismissed after the couple informed the social worker that they had made up. However, Ekaterina and her spouse persisted in their criticism of one another, occasionally even using profanity in front of their child. Walter recorded their phone fights while surreptitiously taking pictures and videos of Ekaterina. Walter claimed that his wife was mentally ill and a terrible mother. She went to a domestic abuse support facility because she could no longer live in continual stress and terror. She made her first attempt to get assistance in the fall of 2020. Walter made every effort to win back his wife and children after they departed. He told Ekaterina that he couldn't live without her and their kid, made a vow to reform, and admitted that he had acted inappropriately. Ekaterina was able to forgive him and bring their daughter back to their house as a result. However, the number of marital conflicts has not decreased. Following her motherhood, Ekaterina traveled to Russia to see her family on multiple occasions, always accompanied by Walter. He was afraid that his wife would go back to Russia and he would not get to see his daughter. When Ekaterina noticed that her husband was getting more and more aggressive, she began to consider filing for divorce. She also saw that all her documents were gone. It was later revealed that Walter had moved all of his wife's documents to his mother's house and left them there. One day, Ekaterina was simply thrown out of the house after yet another quarrel between the couples during a visit from Walter's mother. She was discarded like if she were a meaningless object. After she went to the police, everything was sorted out. One time, Ekaterina and Walter had such a heated quarrel right before their kindergarten that Youth Support Services received a notification from the administration regarding the family. Within 6 weeks, the couple in conflict began to receive help with the children's education. A family crisis counselor was to go with the family and look after the child. The child could not be left with the parents, the counselor said, as they posed too much of a risk. Ekaterina's daughter was the only reason she continued to live with her husband, but she could not take her back to Russia. Ekaterina needed Walter's approval for her daughter to go abroad, proving that he was okay with her child doing so. In August of 2021, Ekaterina took the daughter for the second time and turned to a women's crisis center, telling the administration that her husband wanted to take her life. Social services wanted to give a 5-year-old girl to an orphanage, and the psychologist of the Youth Affairs Department described the situation as very severe. Ekaterina agreed to the Youth Affairs Service taking her daughter into foster care, but Walter and his mother spoke against it. That's why both parents had to take care of the child. For a few days, the girl lived with her father, and for the next few days, she lived in a women's shelter together with her mother, always alternating and with the condition that the couple's daughter must attend kindergarten to learn German. In a few weeks, the family reunited again. Some Russian sources state that in the women's shelter, Ekaterina had bad roommates and that the kindergarten, which the daughter must have been visiting, was too far away. As a result, she returned home. Ekaterina's desire to return to Russia was growing. Walter wasn't against it, but only on the condition that his daughter stay with him in Germany. That's why Ekaterina visited St. Petersburg at the turn of 2021 and 2022 alone. In Russia, she had a date with a man she met on the internet. He was from the Siberian city of Omsk and was a pilot. Ekaterina returned to Germany in mid-January 2022 and continued to chat with the Russian pilot on a daily basis. They sent each other many love messages, but a few weeks after returning to Germany, namely on February 4, 2022, the 32-year-old woman stopped contacting her family and her new lover. An empty suitcase and 13,000 euros from the husband's stash are all Ekaterina took with her when she ran away. Once again, she left her phone, keys, clothes, and most importantly, her 5-year-old daughter. This is the version Walter told the police on the 6th of February, 2022, when Ekaterina's parents couldn't reach her for 2 days and reached out to German police with a request to conduct a welfare check. We found out about her disappearance in a strange way. I couldn't get her on the phone for a few days. As for Walter, then he picked her up and said that he hadn't seen her since the 5th of February. He also said that she doesn't respond because she doesn't have money on her balance, said Svetlana, Ekaterina's mother, to journalists. The entire city went to search for Ekaterina. People searched every square meter, put up flyers, and analyzed every version of what happened. One of the few people who didn't care about Ekaterina's disappearance was Walter. While concerned people put up flyers all around the city, the man was busy with renovating his house. They assumed the worst immediately after the disappearance of the woman, and her husband was the center of attention. The police searched the house of the Baumann family only 4 days after Ekaterina supposedly ran away from it. By this time, Walter was finished with renovations. He painted the floors in the guest room and replaced a couch. He was also seen purchasing a large quantity of cleansers in the local store. The police discovered that the surveillance footage from the video cameras in the house had magically disappeared. Officers searched the house for 3 hours for any evidence of the crime. They led a detection dog through the garage and the house itself. In the garage, the dog became slightly agitated but didn't give a corresponding signal. The first tests conducted by criminalists didn't reveal any evidence within the house or the garage. In the littered car, the police found a knife and an electric shocker, which were seized as potential evidence. Officers noticed that Walter was not concerned about his wife, who went missing in the slightest. Instead, he was interested in whether he would get sole guardianship over his 5-year-old daughter if his wife didn't return. The search for Ekaterina continued day after day, but this did not give results, as if she had disappeared. The officers knew how unlikely it is that the young woman would run abroad, leaving her phone, passport, and daughter behind her. Many in the city and even beyond were alarmed by the inexplicable absence of Ekaterina. 2 weeks after the disappearance of the young mother, about 400 volunteers all around North Germany searched for her in Bremerhaven with the help of rescue dogs several times. This incident caused a huge reaction on social media. Ekaterina's family attracted attention to her disappearance in Russia, and this story was shown on the main Russian channels. My daughter was with this man for 12 years, but for a year and a half, their marriage consisted solely of quarrels, and he hit her many times, said Ekaterina's mother to journalists. He kept my daughter in isolation. He took away her IDs and bank cards. He didn't allow her to meet anyone. On March 1, 2022, 25 days after the disappearance of Ekaterina, horrific news spread, first in Bremerhaven, then all around the country, and later in Russia. An ordinary passerby saw a weird suitcase that washed ashore during his walk along the local river Weser. He was horrified when he opened it. Inside were fragments of a woman's body, which had been packed in garbage bags. It is important to note that not all fragments were inside the suitcase. Some of them were missing. Sadly, the victim turned out to be 32-year-old Ekaterina Baumann. By a strange coincidence, the suitcase was found near the lighthouse where she got married. The investigation was lucky that the suitcase washed up on the coast. Experts suggest that the suitcase could take to the North Sea, after which Catherine would have disappeared forever. The main suspect, Walter Baumann, was taken into custody. After the body was found, the family home was checked a second time. Experts worked for several days. The police found a strong sedative in Ekaterina's blood. The police also found a large number of garbage bags and cleaning products, foil, adhesive tape, and disposable gloves. In addition, in the garage and shed there were canisters of bleach, solvents, and acetic acid, luggage keys, and a pink scarf that Ekaterina was wearing around her neck during her last selfie. Investigators also noted that there were very few personal belongings of Ekaterina in the house. Most of her clothes had been thrown away, and her wedding photo, a memento of good times, was hidden behind the piano. Ekaterina's white jacket from her last selfie was found. The jacket was found in a trash bin, not far from the work of Walter Baumann's mother, Lyudmila Baumann. While in custody, the man wrote frequent letters to his mother, declaring his love for her and calling her "your son." The letters included urgent appeals such as, "Help us all, mother. Save us. You can do it. You are my only hope for the future, and please save me." What he meant by this became clear only 8 months later. Friday, February 4, 2022 was the last day of Ekaterina's life. At 4:30 p.m., she went for a 10-minute walk in her light-colored jacket and yellow skirt. Neighbors' video cameras recorded it. In the evening, the family had dinner. There was tuna, halibut, mashed potatoes, olives, and a bottle of wine. In Walter's words, Ekaterina drank only 1 glass and he drank the rest. That's why he went to sleep at 8 in the evening. According to the court documents, Ekaterina's phone was connected to the network for the last time at 7:41 p.m. At 8:25 p.m., she made a video call to her new lover from her computer. She was in a good mood and said that she would call him again as soon as she put her child to bed. But she didn't call him that evening. She didn't call anyone. 2 hours later, the Russian pilot sent a message wishing her a good night, but his message remained unread. A forensic examination showed that Ekaterina was dead 2 hours after dinner. This was confirmed by the analysis of her stomach contents. Forensic experts found traces of strong sedatives and alcohol in her blood. The hyoid bone was broken, and so the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Everything else that was done with the body, according to experts, was done using very sharp tools. The next morning, Walter briefly opened his car at 7:22 a.m. At 10:20 a.m., the car drove off and returned at 4:49 p.m. 3 days later, Walter called his wife's phone, probably to confirm his legend that she had run away. He also sent her a few messages asking the most obvious question: "Where are you, Ekaterina?" Before Ekaterina's disappearance, Walter and his mother chatted intensely through WhatsApp daily, but after February 4, there was silence between them, which is totally uncharacteristic. In the middle of February, Walter drove his car to auto service, where he told an employee that the car's interior needed to be cleaned very thoroughly from top to bottom. On August 26, 2022, a trial began. The prosecutor argued that Walter slipped sedatives into his wife's drink, and then, when she fell asleep, he strangled her. Walter prepared in advance what he was going to do with her body. The prosecutor's office cited the husband's fear of losing guardianship of his daughter in the event of a divorce, as well as financial losses, as a motive. It was also made public that traces of blood were found in the garage, which Ekaterina's husband wanted to clean, according to advice from the internet. They were under the shelf, on the floor, on the stairs, and in the seams. Traces of blood were also found on the carpet in the trunk of his car. Despite thorough cleaning, experts from the Institute of Forensic Medicine proved that it was Ekaterina's blood in all the places mentioned above. Walter's phone and computer were seized by the police, and they provided answers to many questions. Not long before the tragedy, he made the following search queries: how to avoid punishment for taking a person's life, which acid dissolves meat, how many liters of acid are needed to fill a bathtub, how to read other people's WhatsApp chats. How long does it take to die from sedatives? And can you be convicted without evidence in Germany? In the period from December 2021 to the end of February 22, he made around 500 search queries. Everything pointed to the fact that Walter planned this crime. On the day of his wife's disappearance, he Googled electric shocker twice. Forensic experts found traces of electrocution on Ekaterina's body. Investigators think that Walter was using a shocker to check if his wife was still alive. In court, Walter wore his wedding ring and stated that he is a widower. For 2 long months, he was silent and didn't make any comments on the charges brought against him. Sometimes, when the witnesses were giving their testimonies, he would plug his ears as if it had nothing to do with him. The most emotions he showed was when he saw his mother in the courtroom. He cried when she was questioned as a witness. He stared at her with his hands folded as if in prayer. "Get me out of here," he begged his mother in a letter, and it seems like the woman agreed to help her son. During her testimony, Ludmila Bauman stated that it was she who took Ekaterina's life. "It was me, not my son," she said. Here's what she said to the astonished court. She came to her son's and daughter-in-law's house in the middle of the night because her son called and asked her to care for the granddaughter. When she arrived, she saw Ekaterina on the couch, who was deep asleep. In the words of Ludmila, she wanted to wake her up and started to shake her. Ekaterina woke up and hit her in the face. They started a fight, in the course of which, according to Ludmila, she choked her son's wife. She also said that it was she who performed the following actions with Ekaterina's body. She said, "I loved Ekaterina as a daughter. I didn't want this." And do you, dear friends, believe her? Despite the self-incrimination, Ludmila left the courtroom as a free citizen. On that and all the other days of the trial, the jury and the prosecutor's office didn't believe the woman's statement and assumed that she only wanted to protect her son. Even experienced attorneys were stunned by the mother's self-incrimination. The attorney of the 66-year-old woman demanded her arrest, and her son's defenders demanded Walter's release. But it didn't come to this. The mother was left free, and her son remained in jail. But she wasn't about to give up. Ludmila wrote a letter to the court in which she described what she did with the body in detail. She once again stated, "My son did not do this." She wanted to be questioned again and charged, but the court did not grant her wish and didn't believe her once again. Ludmila managed to prove that she took part in the crime. As already mentioned, not all body parts were found in the suitcase. Ludmila Bauman showed where to look for the missing fragment, which didn't fit in the suitcase. The provided information turned out to be true, and the police did find another bag, which was weighed down so that it didn't float. The bag was found in the exact place Ludmila pointed to. The pedometer on Ludmila's phone has also shown that on the night of the murder, at roughly 12:40 a.m., she walked 220 yards. Neighbors' video cameras near Walter's and Ekaterina's house recorded a person passing by. The phone of Walter's father also showed activity at that time. He drove Ludmila to the son's house, although he told investigators that he was asleep at that time. Experts established that by this time Ekaterina was already dead, which means that the 66-year-old woman was giving false testimony. Here's another strange detail. Ludmila Bauman visited her son's house after Ekaterina's death. She stayed there in the house while someone or something was doing with Ekaterina's body. She helped clean the house, although she did not participate in the procedure herself. In fact, she was an accomplice and helped her son hide evidence of the crime. However, it seems that German law works differently. Ludmila was not arrested and no charges were brought. Doesn't that seem strange? The closer the day of the verdict was, the more desperate the mother became in her attempts to save her son. She wrote the judge another letter in which she once again stated that she committed the crime and not Walter. Now the letter said, "I hated Ekaterina, but couldn't tell my son about it. He was fighting for the love of his wife, and I was afraid that she would want to take his life. That's why I decided to get rid of Ekaterina by making it look as if she poisoned herself because of her tragic love for a Russian pilot." In her words, she printed a goodbye letter in Ekaterina's name and was going to put it next to her when she died. She spiked the juice with various drugs and gave this juice to her son, not telling him what it was, but asking him to give it to his wife during dinner. Ludmila stated that she came to the son's house to leave a farewell note written in Ekaterina's name, but she woke up and Ludmila had to strangle her. But the court didn't believe the woman's confession, as everything pointed to the fact that the crime was committed by her son. Walter remained silent throughout the trial, and at one of the final hearings, he read out 230 sheets of paper from his notes about his life and loves. The main message of his statement was, "I always loved Ekaterina and our daughter, but her emotional burnout and psychological problems led to many quarrels." 230 sheets of paper, yet he only briefly touched on the night that changed everything. He stated that he was asleep when his mother took the life of his wife and dragged her into the garage. Walter blamed his mother for this horrible crime and said, "She betrayed me, used me, and threw me into prison." When addressing the judge, he also said, "My daughter lost her mother. She must not lose her father, too." The most disturbing aspect of this story is not the bloody specificity of the crime. Rather, it is the reality that the couple's 5-year-old daughter witnessed the horror. The Russian grandmother is currently banned from contacting her granddaughter, who is rumored to have been placed in a foster home in Germany. The tragedy unfolded in front of their daughter Walter and Ekaterina. Svetlana, Ekaterina's mother, says, "He put the girl in a traumatic stress situation. She often points to her head and forearms, mumbling something. She saw it all." To prevent her from learning the truth about her real family, the girl is currently being placed in an institution for traumatized children. The girl has also been given a new name. German authorities do not allow Svetlana to talk to her granddaughter on the phone. Svetlana is trying to get guardianship for her. When the verdict was announced on May 23, 2023, Ekaterina's daughter was 6 years old. Walter Baumann was sentenced to life imprisonment. The urn containing Catherine's ashes was buried in her hometown, St. Petersburg.